Blockchain Show is a podcast that demystifies cryptocurrencies and distributed ledger technology.
Here we go. Dr. Tonya Evans. How are you? Welcome to the Blockchain Show.
Hey, Ethan. I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Absolutely. If you wouldn't mind, just tell us a little bit about how we got here, anything you'd like to share about your work. I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, usually when lawyers enter the chat, it's always a bad conversation. But I'm a reformed lawyer. I'm actually an academic, which also could be problematic too when I think of some of my egghead colleagues, shout out. But I'm one of the more unlikely people to even be in the space. I've been in the crypto and blockchain policy and education space since 2017. And I remember at the time I had a friend who was getting an advanced degree, like a second degree for her. She's a non-technologist like me, but she was working in the future of media and just like at the intersection of blockchain and how digital technology and decentralized protocols would really have the potential to revolutionize media. And a lot of the same conversations that she and her working group were having were a lot of the same conversations that I, as an intellectual property lawyer and technology lawyer and professor, a lot of the same conversations with, back in the day of Web 2.0, I guess, or when we had the advent of peer-to-peer technology, Napster, Grokster, when Tor was really picking up steam. And there were a lot of questions about the interrelationship between open source software and some of the concerns around the centralization or the hyper-centralization of power with just a few. We had a lot of high hopes for the early internet and decentralization at that time, but what we see now was the reformation and the siloing and the complete, not even just, it's funny because weaponization was coming to my mind, but the monetization, the hyper monetization of our own data. And as a matter of financial privacy and just privacy in general and how important that is, those things all got my attention. But I was also trained as a lawyer. I practiced big law for 10 years. I clerked in the Third Circuit before that. I'm trained to find the things that go wrong, right? I'm a problem solver. And so I was concerned that I didn't know enough to prepare the next wave of lawyers to be conversant in what was clear to me was going to change not just finance, not just technology. I feel like tech and finance came together, had a baby, and now we have crypto. Shout out to Satoshi and really revolutionizing digital assets. Because obviously we had digital currency that predates, like, January 2009 when Bitcoin came on the scene. But this novel interrelationship between consensus protocols, obviously using public-private key cryptography, it just really revolutionized not just the way we transfer information, but information that relates to value. So I just, I wasn't sure about the magic internet and money at the time. And I'm a Gen Xer, so that's why it's like, I grew up with banks, but I knew enough at the time to say, I can't understand everything that's going on from a technological point of view, but I have to understand what it means for intellectual property, what it means for financial autonomy, how it can revolutionize various industries. And that pulled me down a very deep and dark rabbit hole at the intersection of IP and distributed protocols. And after that, in the beginning of 2018, I started writing legal articles, law review articles about it. The first article I wrote was entitled CryptoKitties, Cryptography and Copyright. And it was at the time when, we had the proliferation of a lot of tokens in the Ethereum ecosystem, and CryptoKitties was out there. And, people would make fun of digital cats, et cetera, but I always knew underneath that what the lab was really doing is a first use case to really start to distinguish between fungible tokens, Bitcoin, ETH, things that are interchangeable with non-fungible tokens, and uses not just for collectibles and artwork and what we saw in the NFT space, but even beyond that with identity and all sorts of things. So something has to come first. And I wanted to understand whether or not this technology could cure a lot of the issues that we saw around the ability to, create and distribute a perfect digital copy of a media file without extinguishing that. And so that is highly problematic when you're trying to exchange value, right? So when you think about Satoshi's white paper and focused on double spend and all of that, you can't have that and have a successful currency. And so that made it really, really interesting as well. Like, what is the interplay with that and protecting creatives and artists? And, that led me down learning about smart contracts and et cetera, et cetera. So my origin, and when I teach about it, both at the law school, but even at Advantage Evans, I opened up my own community, is just start where you are. And that my example of starting where I was as a non-technologist, not really heavy into finance, to understand what it meant for my particular expertise, and then kind of broadened out to other legal issues from there.
Yeah, it's fascinating kind of sharing that with people, like those who are curious about crypto. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your mission there. How do you help them become more confident and explain how and why it's important in today's cryptocurrency landscape?
Yeah, there's when you think about the early kind of cypherpunk movement, and you have a lot of technologists speaking to each other, or maybe from a cypherpunk perspective, you have folks that are really focused on financial privacy and moving value and maintaining their privacy outside of centralization of power, governments, businesses, et cetera. But then we also were talking about mass adoption and how maybe one day we'll live in a world with a global currency like BTC that defies borders. And it defies governments in the sense that you can be anywhere in the world. I travel a lot, so you can be anywhere in the world and not have to worry about converting money, et cetera, or you can have people paid in real time. Those are very powerful concepts. Sometimes it's difficult to have the conversation in the United States where folks are like, the current global reserve is, the US dollar. What do I need crypto for? And that was before the crypto contagion of 2022. When we have these horrible headlines of what's going on. We have, Sam Bankman-Fried's trial is coming up this fall. We have the crisis at Genesis. We have a whole host of things in the midst of a crypto winter as well. So a lot of the folks who are average, ordinary people who were chasing the price when BTC started to pump back up into the 60s, they didn't do their research. And it's actually not fair to really say DYOR, because it's like, where do people begin? There's so many scams out there under the banner of crypto that I wanted to use my name, my reputation. I'm a full tenured professor at Penn State Dickinson Law School. I have a 5-year co-hire appointment with the Penn State Institute for Computational and Data Sciences. I'm licensed to practice law in 4 jurisdictions. I recently testified before Congress House Financial Services Subcommittee on Digital Assets and FinTech and Inclusion. So my pedigree, and I'm using air quotes for those who won't see me, lends itself to trust. And trust is a really big issue. It's not the absence of trust in the crypto space, but reprioritizing our trust in things that can be verified and are transparent, right? But the average person is not going to spend all this time setting up their wallet and geeking out and having a token and wanting to participate in governance. They're just not going to do it. But there's a lot of power on the fringes for the other 99% that could benefit from the power of Bitcoin, that can benefit from the power of not only having an asset you can use as currency, but also can use in terms of a store of value. The value today, you can trust that it'll be there tomorrow and maybe more, right? So it's not just the fact that you can have a unit of exchange or a unit of account and measurement and the like. That value is also preserved as a capital asset because it's taxed in the United States as a capital asset, it being crypto, generally speaking. And so I started thinking about other areas. I'm a Black woman. I'm a Black queer woman, actually. So I think about people who exist in a space where they haven't traditionally been in a position to really take advantage of generational wealth. Because you don't build generational wealth on income. That's why wealthy people don't want an income. Pay me $1 in income and pay me in company stock, or give me something else, something that's going to be out in the world working harder than me, something that is going to have a return on investment that doesn't require me to show up. That is powerful. And that is a game changer above and beyond the speculation of I'll buy this and if it goes up. Like, this is not just about traditional investing. This is fundamentally changing the way that people can build and appreciate assets and take care of their family, do more of the things they love with the people they love. So I love that so much. It makes me think of Kwanzaa is a holiday that's celebrated in the African American community between Christmas and New Year. And I did this article on Medium that gets to the point of why you're asking the question about, like, how do you talk to people who don't know anything about the space, about why it's important, why they need to, at a minimum, learn. And I want them to go and continue to begin to invest. Some of the Kwanzaa principles are really, really interesting because they align really nicely with kind of the cypherpunk ethos and spirit, two completely different groups, but with very aligned principles. When I think of cooperative work and collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics, when I think of self-determination, self-reliance, right? Not relying on somebody else, a lot of that matches. And so I wanted to have those conversations with people to help. And this is the reason I wrote the book, Digital Money Demystified, is to educate the average person the why. Because once people buy into the why, then they'll find their own rabbit hole experience. I never start with the technology, right? People's eyes just glaze over. You've lost them in the 10 minutes when we start talking about nodes, et cetera, et cetera. They want to know the why, where the power is, the dangers where there are a lot of scammers. Like, how do you do this safely and legally and confidently? And so those are the ways that I get to engage people in the conversation. And then just I start debunking their myths until there are none left. And they're like, okay, fine, Professor, now where do I begin? And that's a long way around, but that's kind of the thought process I use to get to how do I engage people with what they need to know to ask the next question, because there's so much information out there. Once people start asking the questions, they'll have their own rabbit hole experience and we'll start to move the needle on more mass adoption.
Yeah, you're right. Definitely felt in the last couple of years this dark cloud or something, with the recent collapse of FTX and discussions around Web3 decentralization. I was kind of wondering, those people who do understand the why, they're on to the next step. They're ready to invest for the first time in this space. Do you have any more advice for those who are ready to finally go for it?
Yeah, well, I start with even talking about FUD, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt. When fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is, I think, in my humble opinion, kind of like the powers that be purposefully injecting false narratives, or even sometimes lazy journalism that doesn't get to the heart of it, that either shows a fundamental misappreciation, lack of understanding, or laziness. And like, I have no tolerance for any of it. The other side of that is being really worried about people with FOMO. Every day I am asked questions about some of the 30,000+ different coins and tokens, and people trying to make a fast buck off of something that we could reasonably equate with like a penny stock or something, which means they don't have a fundamental appreciation for how special Bitcoin is. I'm also the former chair of the Maker Foundation, so I love the Ethereum environment. I'm bullish on the whole ecosystem, but I understand the dominance and importance and the special nature and character of Bitcoin. Like, you have to start there to help people appreciate it. But if you have like a college student who got caught up in a hype cycle during, really bullish market surge, invested tuition payment or some type of tax refund, and all of a sudden they invest everything in it only to realize that it was a scam Either it was a token that was maybe a rug pull, or sometimes things just lose value, or a legitimate scam, right? So either way, that's going to rub people obviously the wrong way, because not only do you lose your coins, but you lose confidence. And the psychological impact of what you've mentioned for down cycles just can't be ignored. For many of us who are holding for the long term, you might use a down cycle as an opportunity to build your position, maybe take something off the top. You're repositioning yourself. We have the halving will be back in 2024 on the Bitcoin side. So, we can see the long game. Many people can't see it because they're driven by short-term cycles. And so the power of authentic information, verified information, trusted communities cannot be overstated or underestimated, where you're really separating fact from fiction, when folks are really invested in the learning cycle too, which so many of us never had. I have learned, I went to Northwestern University. I graduated at the top of my class at Howard University School of Law as the editor-in-chief of my law journal. I have 2 wicked smart parents. I have learned more about finances and investing and business in the last 6 years than in my entire life. Because, with great power comes great responsibility, right? If this is on me, if I have to manage cold storage, if I have to figure this out, then I have to figure out the why for myself, so that in and of itself is empowering, right? The education behind what it means to trust yourself, to trust a community that can verify a particular protocol, and to do that in a way that puts you in the driver's seat. Most people are not used to that. We go to advisors who don't know anything about this industry, right? And are beholden to some of the government, private banking, all of that being caught up. People aren't connected to communities that know a lot about this as well. It's difficult for them to find verified platforms. They don't have an appreciation for why it's important to diversify investments within this asset class, but also across asset classes, right? So we're balancing risk and reward. People aren't having these conversations. So even learning in this space pushes folks to be responsible. And it scares the bejesus out of a lot of people. But once you get on the other side of that, there's so much value in the autonomy that's found when you are in control of your destiny, because you're in control of your finances. And that's some of the power of it as well.
Yeah, that's excellent. Very well said. It's uncomfortable kind of pushing through those barriers. But anyways, I love what you said about finance, because a lot of us we don't know. We're never taught these sort of things. So I think that really kind of resonated with me.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Especially when you think about so many of the myths that I know, and this is what really made me sit down and think, in answer to the point again, how do you get to people? I had to put myself back into my own shoes back in 2017. What were all of the questions that I had that I had to challenge my own limiting beliefs? Or especially even I didn't know that I didn't know, right? There's a ton of stuff I knew that I didn't know, but there's this awesome quadrant where you can really open your eyes about what you don't know that you don't know. And that intellectual curiosity that pulls you forward, that also can be empowering. But it required me to sit down and think of everything that I hear now from family, friends, and from others who come through the Advantage Evans Academy, the volatility of crypto scares people. It entices some people because they're chasing that high of really getting in as a matter of speculation or trying to get rich quickly. And as an aside, let me make this one point. I love the idea of getting rich quickly, as opposed to the alternative, getting rich slowly, or maybe not at all. Let's even check it. But obviously, whenever you hear that, you hear if it's get rich quickly, that means it's some type of scam, right? And so unpacking that so that people can be discerning and make more, I call it prudent crypto investment, which some people say that's an oxymoron. How can you be prudent and a crypto investor? You actually can. The people who are really winning over the long term, because you have the potential upsides, and then the down cycle, it has an energy, it has a life cycle. So, and all emerging or nascent asset classes go through a period of volatility until it matures. So the volatility is where many of the opportunities are if you learn how to navigate the nuances and the energy and the life cycle of the crypto economy, and understand that it exists within this larger macro economy, right? The fundamentals of Bitcoin haven't changed. The long-term trajectory of the EVM on the Ethereum side hasn't changed. In fact, to the extent that it hasn't gotten worse, it's gotten better, right? There are all these other opportunities, but that's where volatility, as things are settling, things are maturing, bad actors are getting kicked out, separating the wheat from the chaff, right? Or just challenging this notion that crypto is only for criminals. Being in front of the House Financial Services Committee and hearing that over and over again is maddening. And as an example, in the last 2 weeks, I've had 3 hits, 2 on credit cards I almost never use, and one that I use a little more frequently for credit card not present. I've actually, thankfully, never been a victim of a crypto scam, but I get scammed every damn day in my email or potential links or credit cards. Like, the number one asset or currency used in criminal activity is still the almighty dollar. And I don't see a lot of people throwing those out. So I'm always concerned when legislators and regulators are pushing down against crypto assets. I think that they have their own agenda when they're not using the same metrics to test other currencies, not the least of which is the dollar, right? Or that crypto is one big scam. I have my own podcast, Tech Intersect. It's a weekly show. And as a lead up to my book that comes out on October 24th, every week I'm taking one of the myths, there are 10 of them, taking one of the myths and doing a deep dive. So I recently talked about crypto being just one big scam or bubble waiting to burst, right? Generalizing the entire industry based on a few bad actors is disingenuous and misleading. And that has nothing to do, we all want all bad actors out, because it's made it incredibly difficult to operate in this space, particularly since 2022. But let's look back at the DAO. Let's look back at some of the other big ones. This 2022 was a big one. I think that's like the biggest. But we've had these cycles of a lot of criminal sensationalism after a hype cycle. It's just the nature of it, or being bad for the environment, or not being secure, or being unregulated, too complicated, a passing fad. Like, all of those things are the new barrier to entry, because we can't blame government or redlining or this, that, and the other, systemic like oppression, et cetera. The main barrier now, I think it's FUD, and I think it's a lack of financial awareness and education that would lead to empowerment. So that's where I would hope that, and I'm certainly focused on the educational side, because that is the real thing that's going to, again, start to move the needle for people to get past the myths, so they can get the facts, so they can make good choices when they're engaging with crypto assets.
That's excellent. Yeah, and I definitely want to put all the links to your podcast, the upcoming book, any writings, all that in the show notes, so people can keep engaging with you and learn, because I feel like it's really important, your message. You know, as a legal expert, I'm just kind of curious, because regulatory considerations, that's something that's just not in my wheelhouse. I just hope and pray that people know what they're doing and they have our best interests at heart. But what are some considerations for leaders, business owners, that they should keep in mind when, you know, they're considering cryptocurrency investments or just any blockchain technology integration?
It's really, really challenging. I'm glad that you asked this question, because so much time, I think I do it as well, and perhaps you've seen this with some of your other guests. We spend a lot of time talking about the investment side of crypto assets, when I often think that there's a lot of opportunity as business leaders to prepare themselves in order to lead their workforce, to engage with better partnerships and strategic alliances about how to really capture a first mover advantage in the Web3 economy that certainly is being built on the rails of decentralized protocols, crypto assets, but then encompasses so much more, right? Artificial intelligence, machine learning, Internet of Things, all of those things are building out a more robust web experience and opportunity, right? So there's so much there. Someone may never invest in crypto ever, but either they invest in companies that invest in the maturity of the space, or they are problem solving their way to provide what we would call the axes and eggs of the next gold rush. And what do I mean by that? Right? Some people are going to go out for the gold, and others are going to have a tent company and an axe and a pick company, and they're going to sell coffee, right? They're going to provide the products and the services that the builders in the space and the investors in the space need, which also can be really, really lucrative. But if the leadership of an organization is not prepared to pivot, and we're not talking about this long-term pivot where we're going to do a lot of research and call some people in, and maybe in 3 to 5 years, no, there's literally no time for that. So, the world will change in the next 18 months to 2 years more than it did in the last decade. That's how quickly things are moving. And it's not that the technology is new, but it's becoming mature. Artificial intelligence is a great example. Been around decades. Most of these technologies actually begin in the hands of government. And then we could say the same, about the internet, et cetera, right? But once it moves into the mainstream, but most people have not yet pivoted or adopted, that creates incredible first mover advantage for businesses. But so many folks have, like on the investment side, been scared off or have their head in the sand or think that it's a fad or it's going away or it's too complicated and confusing. If you think it's complicated or confusing now, try in a year from now, try in 2 years from now. When you're so far behind, there's no chance. You don't know the language, you don't know the technology, you don't know the people, you don't know the rules and regulations, you don't know the legislation that's been percolating over the years, you don't know the regulatory bodies like the Securities and Exchange Commission, Commodity and Futures Trading Commission, the FCC, that like all the alphabet soup of regulation. If you don't understand that, you have no appreciation as a business owner or leader for how to spot regulatory risk, how to go about proper due diligence and compliance, how to innovate and encourage your workforce to innovate for that first mover advantage. Like it's game over. Like it's, Blockbuster meets Netflix 10.0. Because that's how quickly things are moving. Business leaders, this is another thing that I've enjoyed in this fall, not only helping, it's not so much at this point, new investors who have never invested in a thing. It's actually kind of difficult to get those folks on board in the short term, but traditional investors who are looking for opportunity in the same way that you have small to medium-sized businesses in particular that are able to pivot more quickly than more established big business. And a lot of the big business, they have a department already working on this, right? How quickly or slowly they move. Big business is going to always find a way. It's that middle, like the medium and the small size businesses that could be so nimble and adept and really, really move the needle. Because again, this technology is the great equalizer, not just on the investor side, but certainly on the business side as well. And doing things better, faster, cheaper. Like this is part of that advantage that I think when you're a smaller company, you can be more nimble and really leverage this new technology for first mover advantage.
Yeah, that's very well said. I kind of wanted to go back to intellectual property a little bit because I think you had the opportunity to advise the U.S. government on intellectual property laws and specifically related to NFTs and blockchain. Do you think you could elaborate on some of those key considerations for creators and investors in that space?
Yeah, that was a really interesting study, a joint study that was in some roundtable discussions with the United States Patent and Trademark Office and also the Copyright Office. So the big three of intellectual property or patents that apply to exclusive rights for inventors or patent holders. You have copyright that applies to literary and artistic creations, books, music, things of that nature. And then you have both state and federal rights that apply for brand names used in commerce to sell goods or services. That would be trademarks or service marks. So those are the big three. And then we also have trade secret, which is state law, but I was really focused on the big three, as were the Patent and Trademark Office and the Copyright Office. So obviously with the proliferation and the big boom of non-fungible tokens, where we saw these astronomical purchases, and I actually worked with a lot of creatives who may not have sold for millions and millions and millions, but they were paying off loans. They were buying homes. They had a level as artists and creatives of self-sufficiency that was really, really impressive, where they could use the same type of peer-to-peer technology with file sharing, but then create this digitally unique token that is connected through metadata to some other digital asset. Right? It's actually two things. I think of non-fungible tokens, and this is some of the stuff that I and other experts were talking through with the agencies, the difference and the distinction between the unique identifier, the token, and this digital asset that it's connected to and references, or a physical asset, or some physical experience or virtual experience. And so helping the agencies understand the nuances and the difference. One of the ways that I discuss and describe NFTs, for example, is the NFT, the token itself, is not the thing. It is a thing that carries value, but also carries valuable information regarding ownership. So you can roughly analogize it to a deed and a home. The deed is not the home, but it is the way that I exercise control or my connection to it. The house burns down, I can use the token in order to prove my identity, authenticity, connection to it, right? So to help experts who are creating policies and regulations to regulate the sale, the creation, the enforcement, the protection of consumers and investors, they have to be well-versed so that they're not moving quickly just because something terrible happened and now we have to over-regulate. Like, regulation is important to protect consumers and investors, but it has to be well calibrated so it also supports innovation. We would be nowheresville if the government had overreacted and tamped down the growth of the internet, right? And we got stuck maybe at electronic mail, the first use case, also known as email, that nobody likes to open, right? So the idea that that was the first use case, but look at what we're doing with it now, would never have been possible. Smartphones would never have been possible if over hyper regulation had a knee-jerk reaction without all the information, without the taxonomy of the language and what it meant. We've been doing this on the Hill with legislators who, when I think of legislators, they're the one who create the body that creates the laws, and also creates the agencies, like the Patent and Trademark Office, like the Copyright Office. And so those offices can only do what they're empowered to do, and that comes from the legislative body. I also teach administrative law, so that's helped me navigate this area too. So it's really interesting to sit in front of agencies where they have specific questions given their call to power, what they are empowered to do, and how they're empowered to regulate, to say, what do these new assets mean for existing laws, and do we need something new? Because we have a lot of issues around copyright infringement, of someone who can just copy and paste something from the internet, create a token and try and sell it. But the one interesting thing about that is someone who does that is not going to get very far in the NFT ecosystem because community is so important. And there's a lot of self-regulation and self-policing where, yeah, I guess I could take a picture of the Mona Lisa, using it as an old example, or some, a Basquiat or something else. But if it will not be difficult for people to say that's a scammer selling a scammy token, and there'll be no market for it. So that's the one added benefit of the transparency and the robustness of a community that I also wanted to explore and explain to those two agencies in particular, and for them finally to also see the benefits to creatives. Now, we're in a weird place with micropayments right now, and some of that has to do with the different types of tokens and whether you mint on one platform or another, whether those micropayments will continue to go to the original creative. I own a lot of NFTs and I honor those, but I don't want to have to opt into honoring it. I want it to operate in the way that I originally envisioned. But all of those things have to be explored because this new technology is out ahead of existing rules, regulations, and laws, and certainly those who are empowered to enforce them and make sense of them. So I like that, and they're required by their creating documentation to ask the general public and other experts to help them make these decisions. And so I almost never turn down opportunities like that because I want to be in a position to help inform. It's an exciting time to be a lawyer. And an educator in the space too, because we are literally building the plane while we're flying it. And so that's exciting and dangerous all in one. But we have to, in a representative government, we have to make our voices heard while people are figuring it out before big business can influence it in a different direction. And so that's why I have a great hopes for this ecosystem, because we are vocal, because we are very diverse, but we have this common thread and focus to get this right now, because the laws of tomorrow are being written and considered today. So we have got to be vocal for not only these agencies that we're talking about, but all of them. I'm happy to talk about my experience before the House Financial Services Committee, talking specifically about the SEC, because we see a lot of really interesting pushback to some of the things that Gensler and the commission has done to influence and kind of thwart the progress of crypto. But we're seeing a lot of pushback from the judicial branch, thankfully, to some of the things that agencies have been doing.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about that. Yeah, it's like you said, it's exciting, and can't remember the other term. Scary? Terrifying. Right. There we go. Yeah, because I was naive in the beginning. I thought, well, they're going to have a lot of time before the regulatory bodies catch up. The technology is going to advance, and then they're going to have to figure it out. The coding's maybe the best code win kind of thing. But listening to you explain it, there's so many things to consider. It's amazing everything works. If you'd like to elaborate on that, or just what role you think government will have in the future, any challenges, opportunities that might lie ahead in that regard.
Well, it's a huge topic because we are participating in a democratic form of government here in the United States, but a lot of what government does is to protect borders and engage in war to protect borders, or maybe create them. And when we participate in a representative form of government, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we raise our voices and that those voices are heard for the people who are empowered to make these decisions, create laws on the legislative branch, kind of do the day-to-day application of laws, which is what the executive branch and agencies do. And then that third branch, the judicial branch, to make sure that things were done appropriately and according to the laws that were set forth by the legislature. So it's in this grand experiment, this republic, if we can keep it here in the States, it's really playing out. But it was intended to play out slowly. And there's a lot to be said for that, because agreement, consensus, votes. That takes it, it should be a very sobering process. It takes a lot of time. Technology has no time for that. And I've experienced it. I was talking to some friends. I don't have children, but it seems kind of like the quickening, or like birth pangs. Like we're getting closer to some really, really important stuff, and things are just happening more quickly. And government isn't uniquely suited for that, particularly when there is this type of isolation because of borders, when the technology supersedes all borders, connects us in a global way that requires us to look beyond that. And what I think will have to happen, and it will not be pretty, but to really fully realize how much change, evolutionary, but also revolutionary change is occurring, is to change the hyper-competitive nature into something that's more collaborative. Think of the collaboration building the layer one, and then building on top of it, monetization layers, when you have decentralized applications and DAOs on top of that. It requires a great deal of interoperability and collaboration that we know is required for the technology, but as humans, we don't operate that way, particularly under certain political protocols. And that is not just a fundamental change of, yay, we want the internet to be free so that everybody can talk. That was all well and good before we were exchanging value. It was like, oh, wait a minute, value. That sounds like money. We collect money. We need money. We rely on this. That is a game changer. We're not just talking about, I want to send a fax, whatever that is, right? Or an email. The exchange of value is upending governments as we know it. And yet the technology is also so sufficiently decentralized that we're not getting that toothpaste back in the tube. So governments have to reconcile what that means, wringing their hands, et cetera, et cetera. We're hand wringing in the United States. We are pushing the technology off into other jurisdictions that may not be necessarily more favorable, except to the extent that it's clearer. When you hear people talking about regulatory clarity, it's like, just tell us what the rules are. We're happy to follow them, because the criminals are always not going to follow them anyway. We're not interested in them. But we can go to these other jurisdictions, go to Singapore, this, it makes me think of Switzerland and Zug. Like you have those areas that, and Switzerland and Zug has been way far ahead. It's our equivalent of the Silicon Valley when America was really heavily investing in .coms and the internet, right? That's why we have Silicon Valley in the United States. We don't have a similar thing in the United States. It exists in other places because we're wringing our hands and dragging our feet, right? Think of where we are with like semiconductor chips, where now we have to come up with all this legislation to bring this back to the United States because other countries, hashtag China, are doing a more robust effort. That's a matter of national security for those who are, hell-bent on maintaining these borders. Like this is a systematic and systemic and fundamental upending of, it's like a historical thing. I don't think it's hyperbole to say. So when we think about the role that the government will play, it will have to respond to where we are from a technological point of view, or fall to the wayside, as all great powers do eventually. And so we see the hesitation. We see what I testified about, the choke point 2.0, where if you choke off the ability to onboard and offboard on the existing financial rails, they're hoping that it'll die or go away. It's going away at crypto. The best exchanges who are trying to operate here will end up having to operate elsewhere if we don't have the clarity that's needed to operate safely. We can't have a rogue commissioner of the SEC, for example. My word's not yours, but I increasingly just see the opportunity that an agency has to inform and to clarify can be done in one of two ways. most agencies, the SEC, let's use this as an example, has the ability to enforce regulations and rules against an individual party, like if you sue someone in court. Or they have the opportunity to use their rulemaking authority, which was delegated to them by the legislative body that says, we're the legislators, but you're the experts, so we're going to delegate some of our authorities for you to make laws that stick. And that rulemaking informs an entire industry, not just one person, or entity. Every time we see an enforcement action against one person or entity, that's the rule as it relates to that one person or entity, but the rest of the industry is left guessing. Like, is my project like their project? I don't think so, but I'm not going to know until I get sued. Who has time for that? It's costly. It takes too much time with respect to the technology. So to sum it up, we need different leaders or leaders who are willing to recognize the power of being a first mover, because every day we lose that opportunity here in the space. And it can't be stopped. Makes me think of the sanction against Tornado Cash. Okay, but Tornado Cash still exists, right? Because the technology is agnostic. If people are misusing it, abusing it, or criminals, let's go after that. So it'll be a fundamental shift. It'll be an interesting time to watch. And I don't think anything will happen in the midst of the presidential cycle. So we probably have to look out to 2025. That gives us some time to continue to influence legislators to make more substantive and substantial moves in the right direction for the community, for the industry, because it's not really just about the crypto community. It's about the benefits really for humanity, also not hyperbole. That's how big and impactful this is.
Yeah. No, it's excellent. And I hope you run for president, honestly.
I'm going off the grid. I'm going to pray for everybody. I'm going off the grid.
Okay. Yeah, I can't blame you. Well, I just want to thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind sharing with us again, where people can get the podcast, read your writings and your books. And, and if you want, share any exciting projects or initiatives that you're currently involved, or anything that you'd like to leave us with, I'd appreciate.
Awesome. Well, I have the year off this year from teaching because my first book in this space, I have 3 others, but my first book in the crypto space is called Digital Money Demystified. It's out on October 24th. You can pre-order it now. Pre-ordering is really, really important because it signals to the Amazons of the world this is an important topic that we want to hear more about. You can pre-order and get some special bonuses and things like that at digitalmoneydemystified.com. Again, that's digitalmoneydemystified.com. And you can also go to proftonyaevans.com, PROSF as in professor, Tonya, TONYA, Evans, EVANS, proftonyaevans.com. And that gives you the rest of the opportunity if you want to engage me for consulting. If you want to take any courses, they range from free to high engagement. So there's something for everybody. You don't have to do all the things at one time, but you do have to do something, and definitely stay curious. Keep educating yourself about the space. There's a really important opportunity for the average person to make a significant difference in their life, personally and professionally. But it starts like today. We talk about the future of work and wealth, but it's all starting today. And so join Ethan in this revolution, this evolution in this revolution, and let's win.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Tonya Evans, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you.